Jake Holloway never believed in the lottery. At 32, Jake had what he called a working man's education. He knew how to fix an engine blindfolded, how to stretch a paycheck till it squealed, and how to drink bourbon until the world got soft around the edges. He didn't care much for ghost stories. He worked deliveries for Martin's Family Market, hauling crates of soda, bread, and sometimes the occasional local beer. He was out late most nights, driving the battered white delivery van with the peeling MFM logo. That's how he was there. That's how he saw it. September 30th, 11:47 p.m. Jake was unloading milk crates when he felt it, the strange hush. The night was usually alive with cricket chirps, the distant whoop of an owl, the hum of tires on Route 9, but it all died at once. The air went still, too still, like the breath was sucked out of the world, and then he saw the writing. One letter at a time, the sound of chalk, faint but sharp, scratching across the glass from the inside. But there was no one there. The store was locked, dark. The aisles stood empty. Still the letters appeared. J-A-K-E-H-O-L-O-W-A-Y. Jake Holloway. His own damn name. Jake wasn't the first. The lottery went back nearly 100 years. The first written account was from 1923, a yellowed clipping from the Dover's Crossing Gazette. It spoke of phantom letters that appeared on the glass of Old Man Greeley's dry goods store. 5 names. By morning, all 5 townsfolk had vanished, never to be seen again. The lottery came every year, like clockwork. Some years it claimed 3, some years a dozen. One year it took 27. Nobody knew why. Nobody fought it. Most didn't even talk about it. It was the town's dirty secret, the cancer under its skin. Every September 31st, folks locked their doors, drew their blinds, and prayed. They left offerings: 2 pies, bottles of whiskey, dead chickens, and once, even a newborn calf lined up on the sidewalk outside Martin's. Offerings never mattered. The chalk always wrote its list. Jake stumbled back, dropping a crate of milk. The bottle shattered. White liquid spreading across the pavement like blood in moonlight. No, he muttered. No, no, no. But there it was. His name. By dawn, he'd be gone. He thought of running. Just jumping in the van and flooring it south until the tank went dry. But that had been tried before. He remembered Billy Carson, the kid who tried to drive to Florida after his name appeared. Folks said he made it 3 states before his truck was found idling on the roadside, door wide open, radio playing static. Billy was gone. Jake remembered the Peterson family too. Their whole lot was named 1 year mom, dad, 2 little girls. They packed up and moved to Montana within hours. Sold the house cheap. 3 weeks later, the sheriff of Helena called Dover's Crossing to report an abandoned station wagon on the interstate. Engine running, doors open. No Petersons. Nobody escaped the lottery. Jake ran anyway. Jake Holloway didn't run far. His delivery van rattled down Main Street, past shuttered diners and clapboard houses with their curtains drawn tight. The night pressed against him, thick and airless. Every instinct screamed keep driving, but he couldn't. Not because the van was nearly out of gas. Not because he believed the stories about people vanishing on the road. It was because of what he saw. More names, not just his. The chalk had bloomed across the whole wide window of Martin's Market. White letters glowing faint in the moonlight like bones underwater. Jake Holloway, Susan Creel, Tommy Keller, Marge Dufresne, Pastor Richard Lyle. 5 names this year. Jake slammed the brakes. The van screeched to a stop, tires coughing smoke. He leaned over the wheel, chest heaving. He knew all of them. Everyone in Dover's Crossing knew everyone. Susan Creel, 50, ran the sewing shop on Birch Street, always wore red lipstick too bright for her pale face. Tommy Keller, 17, football kid, smart mouth, always hanging around the gas station with his friends, pumping quarters into the pinball machine. Marge Dufresne, 68, widow, lived with 4 cats in the old boarding house near the bridge. Pastor Lyle, 60, booming voice, hands too heavy when he shook yours, smelled faintly of smoke, though he preached hellfire against it. And Jake, the unlucky 5. Jake knew he couldn't just sit in the van, so he did the one thing no one in town ever did. He went to find the others. He started with Susan Creel. Her sewing shop glowed dimly with a single lamp inside. Susan herself sat behind the counter, lipstick smudged, eyes wide. She'd seen it too. You saw? Jake asked, pushing inside, the little bell jangling above him. Susan didn't answer right away. She reached under the counter and held up a revolver, her hand shaking but steady enough to make Jake's stomach clench. "Don't come closer," she whispered. "I'm not Jesus, Susan. I'm not here to hurt you." "My name's on the list too." That stopped her. Her lips trembled. "Yours?" Jake nodded. "Holloway." "Big as life." The gun lowered, slowly. "Then I guess we're both dead already," Susan muttered. By 1 in the morning, the 5 had gathered. Not at the church Lyle's choice, but in the basement of the VFW hall, where the air smelled of stale beer and old wood polish. Jake, Susan, Tommy, Marge, and Pastor Lyle sat around a plastic table, their faces lit by a single hanging bulb that buzzed like a hornet. 5 names, Lyle said, voice heavy, the number of death. Half a pentagram, an invitation to the devil. "Oh, shut it, preacher," Susan snapped. "This ain't about your Sunday sermons. We're screwed, that's all. Ain't no Bible verse that'll change it." Tommy was pale but defiant. "We don't have to just wait for it. We can fight." "Fight what?" Marge whispered. Her hands shook as she lit a cigarette. "What is it, Tommy? You ever seen it?" Silence fell. Because none of them had. No one ever saw what came for the names. They just vanished. They decided not to sleep. Not to separate. If the lottery wanted them, it would have to take them from the same room, together. So they sat. Hours bled away. 2 and 3, 4. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to gnaw on their nerves. Jake found himself staring at the second hand, hypnotized, half expecting it to stutter, to freeze, to turn backwards. At 4:17 it happened. The light bulb flickered. Not like a power surge. Not like bad wiring. But like something passed in front of it. Something big. A shadow slid across the walls. Not cast by any of them. Not shaped like a man. Long, spindly, jointed wrong. Marge gasped and clutched her chest. Susan raised her revolver, pointing it at empty air. Jake smelled something then. Chalk dust. Dry, bitter. Like the classroom blackboards of his childhood. It filled his lungs, made him cough. The bulb went out. Total blackness. And in that dark came the sound, see that awful chalk on glass scrape. But there was no glass here. Only walls. The sound came from inside. The 5 huddled closer. Tommy swore under his breath. Pastor Lyle began to mutter prayers, words tumbling over each other, half coherent. The bulb flared back to life. They were all still there. All 5. But something new had been written. On the wall. In chalk that hadn't been there before. Dawn. The sun rose. It shouldn't have been a relief, but it was. They were still alive, still breathing. They stumbled out into the thin morning light like survivors of a storm. But Marge didn't make it to noon. Jake found her at the boarding house. Or what was left of her. Her front door stood wide open. Her 4 cats meowed in the yard, tails puffed. Inside, her teacup still steamed on the counter. A radio played oldies. And on the living room wall, in bone-white chalk, one word, taken. No Marge. No body. Just absence. Jake stood there, fists trembling, bile rising in his throat. 4 left. By tomorrow, would it be 3 or none? Marge's disappearance hit them like a hammer. Jake couldn't shake the image of her neat little house, the steaming teacup, the chalk on the wall. Taken. It was like the word itself carried weight, pressing down on his ribs, making it hard to breathe. By noon, the whole town knew. Word traveled fast in Dover's Crossing, always had. But folks didn't talk about it openly. They whispered. They turned their heads when Jake walked by. They pretended to sweep porches or check mailboxes while their eyes followed him, wary, guilty. The 4 survivors, Jake, Susan, Tommy, and Pastor Lyle met again at the VFW. No one suggested leaving town now. "Not after Marge. We're not safe in our homes," Susan said. Her lipstick was smeared, her revolver never far from reach. "We stay together. We don't let it corner us alone." "It'll take us anyway," Lyle said, his voice low, tired. "It's always taken. That's the truth. You can't bargain with it. You can't run from it. You can only pray." "Prayers don't do jack," Jake snapped. "We fight, or we figure it out. There's got to be a reason this happens. A beginning." Tommy leaned forward, his young face pale but stubborn. "Then we find out where it started. Every small town has one. The person who knows too much keeps the yellowed newspapers, the journals, the whispered stories. In Dover's Crossing, that was Ruth Bennett, 90 years old, nearly blind, sharp as broken glass. She lived in a crumbling farmhouse on Miller's Hill, surrounded by stacks of books and the smell of mothballs. When Jake and Susan came to her door, Ruth already knew why. "You've seen the names," she rasped. Jake nodded. "This year, mine was one of M." Ruth gave a little smile, toothless and cruel. "Then you'll want to know the truth before it takes you." They sat in her parlor, listening to the ticking of an ancient grandfather clock. Dust motes swirled in the thin sunlight. Ruth spoke slowly, like every word was a stone being hauled from a deep well. "It began before Dover's Crossing was a town," she said. "Before the first church, before the first market. The settlers built here in 1729, but the land wasn't empty. It belonged to something else." Jake frowned. "Something else?" Ruth's milky eyes fixed on him. A bargain was struck. Blood for survival, names for prosperity. The crops grew, the winters spared us, the wolves kept away. All it asked was one night a year. One night, and those chosen would be given. Susan's knuckles whitened around her revolver. Given to what? Ruth only smiled. "Do you really want to see?" That night, Jake dreamed. He stood outside Martin's Market. The neon buzzed. The window was dark, and then, faintly, he saw him. A man-shaped figure hunched inside, back bent, arm moving in sharp jerks. Hand to glass, chalk squeaking, scratching. The chalk man. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, shadow hiding his face. His fingers were too long, too many joints, bending wrong as they gripped the chalk. His arm moved ceaselessly, tireless, scrawling names in letters too tall, too crooked. Jake pressed against the glass, shouting, but no sound came out. The chalk man turned. His face was a smear of white dust. Hollow eye sockets. No mouth, just a jagged crack splitting the dust. And from that crack, a hiss like stone grinding stone. Dawn. Jake woke gasping, drenched in sweat. The word echoed in his ears. By morning, it was Susan. Her shop door hung open. The sewing machine still hummed, needle moving up and down, though no cloth sat beneath it. Spools of red thread littered the floor like spilled entrails. On the mirror above the counter, chalk letters glared, stitched. No Susan. Her revolver lay on the floor, cylinder empty, 6 shells fired. Jake stood in the wreckage, his hands trembling. Pastor Lyle wept silently in the doorway. Tommy swore, pacing, fists clenched. 2 gone, Jake whispered. "Just 2 of us left." "3, Tommy said, pointing at Lyle. Jake stared at the preacher. "He's not one of us." His name was there too, don't forget that. For the first time, Jake saw doubt in Lyle's eyes. Real fear. That night, Jake and Tommy broke into Martin's Market. It was madness, but Jake couldn't let it go. Ruth's words, the dream, Susan's fate, they all pointed back here. The market, the window, the chalk man. Inside, the aisles were dark, shelves lined with canned beans and dusty cereal boxes. Jake's flashlight beam trembled as it swept over the linoleum. Tommy found it first, a hatch in the floor, hidden beneath a stack of crates. They pried it open. A staircase yawned downward, stone steps worn smooth by centuries of feet. The air that rose from below was dry, bitter, and smelled of chalk. Jake met Tommy's eyes. Neither spoke. Both knew. They went down. The cellar was older than the town itself. Stone walls, low ceiling, air heavy as a tomb. Symbols covered the walls, carved deep, filled with chalk dust that glowed faintly in the flashlight beam. At the far end stood a wall of glass. Not a window, not exactly too thick, too wide. And on the other side, darkness, endless, except for the hand. White as bone, fingers jointed wrong, too many, pressed against the glass. Slowly moving, drawing. Names bloomed across the inside of the glass, backwards but clear. Jake Holloway, Tommy Keller, Richard Lyle. 3 names left. Jake's heart hammered. Tommy stepped back, eyes wide. "It sees us." And then the hand turned. The chalk man pressed its face to the glass. White dust smeared. Hollow sockets burning, crack mouth splitting wider. From the darkness came the hiss. Dawn. The glass shuddered. A new word appeared. Tonight. Owned with a force that rattled the hinges, dust raining from the joists. The lock slid into place by itself, metal grinding against metal. Trapped. Jake pounded on it with both fists. "Hey, open up. Somebody open this goddamn thing." Silence. Tommy's flashlight beam cut across the basement walls, illuminating the scrawled chalk symbols. His voice was a rasp. "Jake, look." On the far wall, where there had been only carvings before, new words now appeared, letter by letter. 3 remain. Jake's breath caught. "It's watching us." The scrape of boots echoed down the steps. Jake spun, flashlight beam trembling. For a split second, he thought the chalk man had come. But it was Pastor Richard Lyle. He descended slowly, hands empty, face pale with sweat. The bulb at the top of the stairs flickered behind him. "I knew you'd come here," Lyle said softly. "Everybody does, sooner or later. You just don't usually make it back up." Jake stared. "You knew about this?" Lyle's eyes gleamed with something close to madness. "The church was built on this bargain. I've read the old sermons, the diaries. Every shepherd of Dover's Crossing has known. It isn't a curse, Jake, it's salvation. This town prospers because it feeds." Tommy swore. "You're insane." Lyle stepped closer, voice rising. "You think it's coincidence we've never starved? That the mines never caved? That no plague ever touched us? The lottery is the price, and the chalk man is the collector." Jake's fists tightened. "You're saying you accept this?" "I embrace it," Lyle whispered. "And I'll live long enough to see it fed again." The glass wall pulsed. On the other side, the chalk man's face pressed closer, sockets burning faint light. The crack mouth widened, dust spilling like ash. New letters scraped across the glass. "One must be given." The air turned heavy, pressing down on Jake's shoulders, shoving his knees toward the floor. Tommy shouted against it, voice breaking. "No, we're not giving anyone." But Lyle stepped forward, hands spread like a preacher blessing his flock. "This is how it's always done. One offers, the others live. Don't you see? That's the mercy in it." Jake's mind reeled. The stories, the disappearances. Had it always been like this? Did the town secretly choose sacrifices, offer them willingly, to keep the rest safe? Lyle pointed at Tommy. "The boy. His life ahead of him is short anyway. One lamb, one harvest. The chalk man will be fed, and will walk free." Tommy's face drained white. "You sick bastard." Jake's heart pounded. He didn't know what was worse. The creature behind the glass, or the man standing in front of him. The pressure grew unbearable. Jake's ears rang. The carvings on the walls seemed to writhe. The chalk man's hand pressed flat against the glass. "Dawn." The word thundered in Jake's head. Then the glass cracked. Just a hairline fissure, spidering outward. A sound like ice breaking on a winter pond. But it was enough to make Jake's bowels turn liquid. Tommy panicked. He lunged toward the hatch, pounding, kicking, screaming. "Let us out. Let us out." Lyle moved faster than Jake thought a man his age could. He grabbed Tommy by the collar, dragging him back. "No!" Jake roared, shoving forward. The three of them collided. Flashlight clattered to the floor. Dust swirled. Their shadows danced across the glowing chalk symbols. Jake swung wild, his fist connecting with Lyle's jaw. The preacher staggered, blood on his lip, but his grip on Tommy didn't loosen. "Jake!" Tommy screamed. And then, before Jake could stop it, Lyle shoved Tommy forward. Straight into the glass. The moment Tommy's body struck the glass, it cracked wide. A fissure opened like a mouth, and the chalk man's hand shot through. It didn't grab him. It absorbed him. Tommy's skin whitened, his eyes hollowed, his screams became chalk dust. His whole body dissolved into powder, smeared across the hand that dragged him through the crack. And then he was gone. The crack sealed shut. The glass was whole again. Only a smear of white dust remained where Tommy had been. Jake stood frozen, chest heaving, bile rising in his throat. On the glass, new letters scrawled themselves. 2 remain. Jake turned slowly toward Lyle. The preacher was smiling. "You son of a bitch," Jake whispered. Lyle wiped the blood from his chin. "Don't you see? It works. It always works. We're alive, Jake. We'll see morning. That's all that matters." Jake's hands trembled, fists clenched. He wanted to break Lyle's face, to feed him to the glass. But deep down, fear gnawed at him. Because Lyle wasn't entirely wrong. 2 names left. Would the chalk man stop if one more was given, or would it keep going until both were taken anyway? Jake didn't know. And that was the worst of it. The hatch above them creaked, not by hand, not by lock. It simply opened, as if the chalk man himself had decided to let them go. Jake stared at it, pulse racing. Freedom or a trap? Lyle stepped toward it, eyes shining with conviction. "Do you see? It accepts the offering. The path is open." Jake followed, but not because he believed. Because staying in that cellar one more second would drive him mad. As they climbed the steps, Jake felt the chalk man's sockets boring into his back. He didn't dare look. Not yet. When Jake and Pastor Lyle stumbled out of Martin's Market into the pale light of morning, the street was not empty. The town was waiting. Dozens of people stood in silence along Main Street, men with their hands shoved in work jackets, women clutching rosaries, children peeking from behind their mothers' skirts. Their faces were grave, expectant. Jake's stomach dropped. They weren't surprised to see him. They weren't even horrified. They were watching. Like an audience waiting for the end of a play, Lyle raised his arms like a prophet. The offering was accepted. The town is safe another year, and the crowd cheered. Not loudly, not with joy, but with relief, like weary travelers seeing the first glow of home after a storm. Jake staggered backward. "You knew," he rasped. His voice shook with fury. "All of you, you knew." No one denied it. No one met his eyes. A little boy in the crowd tugged at his mother's sleeve and asked, clear as day, "Who's next year, Mama?" Jake couldn't take it. He shoved through the crowd, past their guilty stares, back toward his apartment above the garage. Lyle followed, still speaking in low, fervent tones. "You don't understand, Jake. This is how we survive. We don't choose the names, the chalk man does. All we can do is accept." Jake spun on him, fists trembling. "You shoved Tommy into that glass." Lyle didn't flinch. He was marked. Better to give him quickly than wait for it to drag him screaming through the walls. "I did him a mercy." "Mercy?" Jake roared. "You call that mercy?" He was just a kid. Lyle's eyes hardened. "You think this is about fairness? About youth or age? The lottery doesn't care who you are, Jake, only that you go." Jake's voice broke. "Then why are you still here?" Silence stretched between them. And in that silence, Jake understood. Lyle knew something. Something that made him believe he would never truly be taken. That night, Jake went back to Ruth Bennett. The old woman sat in her chair by the clock, her clouded eyes staring into forever. She didn't greet him, didn't need to. "You've seen too much," she croaked. Jake sat heavily, exhaustion grinding in his bones. "They all know. The whole damn town. They're in on it." "Not in," Ruth said. "Bound. The town was founded on a covenant. Blood for safety. Names for harvest. You live here. You're part of it. Whether you want to be or not." Jake's voice dropped to a whisper. "How do I break it?" Ruth laughed, a dry wheeze. "Break it? You can't. Not without breaking yourself. The chalk man doesn't forgive. He only takes." "Then why does Lyle think he's safe?" Jake demanded. "He acts like he's untouchable." Her mouth twisted. "Ah. The preachers read the Book of Chalk." Jake blinked. "The what?" Ruth leaned forward, breath hot and sour. "A ledger. Written in dust, bound in hide. It tells the rules of the lottery. And if Lyle has it, he believes he can cheat." Jake's gut turned. "Where do I find it?" Ruth's milky eyes seemed to look past him, through him. "Where it's always been. Beneath the market. In the cellar of glass." That night, Jake didn't sleep. The town outside was too quiet. No crickets, no dogs barking, no rustle of wind. Just the faint scrape of chalk. Everywhere. On the ceiling above his bed. On the inside of the bathroom mirror. On the window pane by his kitchen sink. See, when he finally forced himself to look, new words sprawled in uneven letters. Only one survives. Jake smashed the mirror with his fist, blood dripping across the shards. But the letters didn't vanish. They glowed brighter. He returned to the market. This time, he didn't sneak. He stormed in through the front door, crowbar in hand. The hatch yawned open, waiting for him. The cellar felt colder now, the air thick with dust that coated his tongue. The glass wall loomed, but the chalkman was nowhere in sight. Only faint traces of white streaked across the surface, like handprints smeared on fogged glass. And there, on a pedestal of stone, sat a book. The cover was stretched hide, cracked and yellow, stitched with red thread. Dust coated it like snow. Jake opened it. Inside, page after page of names, written in chalk. Thousands of them. Dates stretching back centuries. And at the end, scrawled in frantic, jagged letters, "The last name survives." Jake's stomach turned. His name was there. Jake Holloway. One of the final three. But the last name listed, the final one before the page ended, was not his. It was Richard Lyle. Jake staggered back, bile rising in his throat. The preacher hadn't been chosen by chance. He'd made sure his name was last. Somehow, Lyle had tampered with the lottery, shifted the order, ensured survival. Jake slammed the book shut, fury boiling in his chest. A shadow stirred behind the glass. Long fingers dragged down the surface. Hollow sockets glowed. The chalkman hissed one word into Jake's skull. "Dawn." The glass cracked again. Jake clutched the book of chalk to his chest and ran. Jake Holloway didn't sleep. Couldn't. The book of chalk sat on his kitchen table, a slab of dust and skin, humming faintly like a living thing. Every time he tried to close his eyes, he swore he heard pages turning on their own, Thousands of names, thousands of vanishings, and every year one survivor. The last name. This year, Richard Lyle. Jake's own name was there too, written above it in bone white chalk, marked for death. The preacher had cheated. Jake flexed his bloody hand, the knuckles swollen from smashing the mirror. He thought of Tommy's scream as he dissolved, of Marge's empty cats, of Susan's shop with its still humming sewing machine. The town had known. The preacher had known. And Jake knew one thing now. If he didn't change the book, he'd be dust by dawn. The church bell rang at midnight. Jake pushed through the heavy wooden doors, book of chalk clutched to his chest. Inside, Pastor Lyle was already waiting. Not in robes, not with a Bible, but with a smile. "You found it," Lyle said softly. "I wondered if you would." Jake's voice was raw. "You moved your name." Lyle's eyes gleamed in the candlelight. "I preserved the covenant. Someone must survive, Jake. Someone must remember the bargain. Without me, the town would fall into ruin." Jake hurled the book onto the altar. The pages rustled as if stirred by breath. "You think you're chosen? You think you're holy? You're just a coward who shoved a boy into the fire to save yourself." Lyle stepped closer. "You don't understand. This isn't about bravery. It's about balance. Every bargain has rules. And the rule is simple. The last name lives. Wouldn't you do the same if you could?" Jake's fists trembled. "Maybe, but I wouldn't smile about it." The church lights flickered. Chalk dust fell from the rafters like snow. On the stained glass windows, white lines began to appear, crawling upward in jagged strokes. Words scrawled themselves across Christ's outstretched hands. "Dawn." The glass cracked. Lyle looked up, eyes shining with fever. "It's coming, the reckoning." Jake grabbed the book, flipping through the pages. His fingers smeared chalk dust across centuries of names until he found it his page this year. 5 names, 4 gone. 1 left. Richard Lyle. Jake lifted the chalk stub tied to the spine by a fraying thread. His hand shook as he pressed it to the page. "What are you doing?" Lyle hissed. Jake ground his teeth, changing the rules. And beneath Lyle's name, he began to scroll. Jake Holloway. The church doors slammed open. Wind howled through, thick with dust. And there it was, tall, hunched, fingers jointed wrong, face a mask of white powder. The chalk man stepped into the church. Every window shattered. Chalk poured in like smoke, filling the air, coating Jake's lungs until he gagged. Lyle fell to his knees, arms outstretched. "I've given them all. I am the last. You cannot take me." The chalk man tilted its head, sockets burning faint fire. Its crack mouth opened. The hiss shook the pews. "Only one survives." Jake raised the book high, then read it. The creature's sockets locked onto the page. For a moment, the church went utterly still. Then the letters shifted. Richard Lyle's name blurred, smearing to nothing. And beneath it, clear and new, Jake Holloway. Lyle's scream tore through the church. No, it's mine. I earned it." He lunged for the book, clawing at Jake. "You can't take it from me." But the chalk man moved first. Its long fingers closed around Lyle's body. The preacher writhed, kicked, pleaded. His skin turned white, cracking, splitting. His eyes hollowed. Dust poured from his mouth like breath. And then he was gone. The book shut itself with a snap. The chalk man turned toward Jake. For a heartbeat, Jake thought it would take him anyway. That no trick, no name shifting, no book could save him from the covenant. But instead, the creature bent low, sockets burning into his skull. Survive. The crack mouth widened, spilling dust across the altar. And then the chalk man dissolved. The church went silent. Morning came. Jake walked out into the sunlight, the book of chalk heavy in his hands. The town waited, silent, expectant. When they saw him, alive, they nodded. They didn't cheer. They didn't cry. They simply accepted, as they always had. One survives. Jake Holloway was the one. But as he looked at their faces, relieved, guilty, resigned, he knew it wasn't over. Because next September 31st, more names would bloom on the window. And Jake had the book now. For the first time in 100 years, the rules weren't just written. They could be changed. Jake Holloway couldn't wash the dust from his skin. He scrubbed it until his arms were raw, but the chalk clung to him like memory. In the mirror, his reflection looked thinner, paler. Eyes ringed with sleepless hollows. He had survived. But survival didn't feel like victory. On the table in his small apartment, the book of chalk sat unopened. The stub of chalk tied to its spine twitched faintly, as if eager for his hand. He hadn't touched it since that night. And yet, sometimes, when the street was quiet, He swore he heard it whisper his name. Over and over. Jake, Jake, Jake. Word spread fast in Mill Creek. The preacher was gone. Jake remained. That was all the townsfolk needed to know. At first, they treated him like a miracle. Men tipped their hats. Women left food on his stoop. Children stared at him with wide, frightened eyes, but reverence curdled quickly into unease. When Jake walked down Main Street, conversations stilled. People crossed to the other side. No one wanted to be too close. Survivors didn't last long. Some claimed they changed. Some whispered they became something else. Jake caught fragments in the grocery store. He's marked now. Keeper's curse. Better him than us. And always, the silence afterward, heavy as the church bell. That night, Jake dreamed of chalk. Lines scrawled themselves across the walls, spelling his name 100 times. When he turned, the chalk man stood in the corner, its sockets burning like dying stars. Jake jolted awake, sweat soaking his sheets. The book sat on his nightstand, though he was certain he'd left it on the kitchen table. Its cover was cracked open, a single page exposed. 5 new names had already appeared. And the date, September 31st, next year. Jake stared until his throat closed. He didn't recognize the names, yet, but he knew them. Neighbors, friends, people he passed every day. The chalk stub twitched, eager. And before he knew it, Jake was holding it. The first time Jake wrote in the book, it was an accident. A boy named Henry Price had shoved him outside the diner, muttering "Dustman" under his breath. Jake had balled his fists, ready to fight, but instead, something else took over. He opened the book. The page shivered. The chalk leapt into his hand. Before he understood what he was doing, he wrote, "Henry Price." The letters burned white, sinking into the paper. And the very next day, the boy was gone. Vanished by dawn. Jake's stomach churned. His hands shook. But a terrible thought sprouted, one he couldn't shake. He had power now, not just to survive, to decide. Weeks passed. The lottery wasn't waiting for September anymore. Not for Jake. Every time anger flared in him, the book responded. Every time he scrawled a name, whether in hate, in fear, in self-defense, they disappeared. Mill Creek grew quieter. Shops closed. Windows boarded up. People fled, whispering prayers. But some stayed. And those who stayed began to leave offerings at Jake's door. Food, trinkets, names written on scraps of paper. Please, they begged silently. Take them, not us. And Jake, exhausted, brittle, drowning in whispers, sometimes did. One night, Jake caught his reflection again. It wasn't his face. The sockets were hollow, the mouth cracked wide. Dust trickled from the corners of his eyes like tears. He smashed the mirror, but when he looked down, the chalk was already in his hand. The book pulsed on the table, pages fluttering like a beating heart. Jake clutched his head, screaming, "I'm not him. I'm not the chalk man." But the whispers only grew louder. On September 30th, Jake stumbled back into the church. The town was nearly empty now. Only a few desperate souls remained, waiting for the window, waiting for the names. Jake dragged the book up to the altar, slamming it down. The chalk stub shook in his fist. He could end it here, burn it, rip it, tear the covenant apart. But the book hummed, alive with centuries of hunger. If he destroyed it, would it end the lottery? Or would it unleash something worse? The chalk cracked in his grip. For the first time, Jake realized, maybe there had never been a choice. Maybe every keeper before him had stood in this exact place, and every one of them had failed. Because by then, it wasn't the keeper writing names. It was the book. The clock struck midnight. The window at the grocery store bloomed white with chalk. New names, new sacrifices. But this year, one name towered above the rest. Jake Holloway. The book snapped shut. Dust filled the church, rising like a storm. The chalk man stepped from the shadows, no longer a stranger, but something Jake almost recognized. Its sockets burned. Its mouth cracked open. Jake dropped the chalk. His body trembled as the truth set in. He hadn't survived the lottery. He had become it. Jake Holloway could feel it now. The dust wasn't clinging to his skin anymore, it was inside him. His lungs rasped with every breath, as if the air carried grit. His veins tingled like chalk lines under pressure. Every step left faint powder on the floorboards of the church. The chalk man didn't speak. It didn't need to. Jake knew what it wanted. Take the chalk, write the names. Be the keeper. At dawn, Mill Creek was almost empty. But a handful had stayed. Mrs. Denner, the old woman who'd raised him after his parents vanished in the lottery. Sheriff Cole, worn thin, holding a rusted shotgun. And Marcy Hale, the only one who still looked Jake in the eyes without fear. They had gathered outside the church waiting. When Jake emerged, pale and cracked, their faces broke. "You're still you," Marcy said softly, stepping closer. "Aren't you?" Jake opened his mouth to answer, but only a trickle of white dust spilled out. The book lay heavy in Jake's arms. He held it out to them. Its pages shivered, alive. "It wants names," Jake croaked, voice raw. "If I give it names, it spares the rest." Sheriff Cole spat. "That ain't a bargain. That's slavery." "But if I burn it," Jake whispered, "the lottery might end. Or it might take all of us." Silence. Even the morning birds had abandoned Mill Creek. Mrs. Denner's voice cracked like glass. "Child, sometimes the only way to break a curse is to bleed with it." The chalk stub rolled into Jake's palm without him willing it. His hand lifted toward the book. Marcy grabbed him, fingers tight around his wrist. "Fight it," she cried. "You're stronger than it." Jake wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe he still had a choice. But his hand shook violently, bones cracking as if something inside him wanted out. Dust poured from his skin, coating the altar. And then the chalk stabbed down. It began writing on its own, scrawling names across the page. Jake screamed, trying to wrench his arm away, but it wasn't his arm anymore. Sheriff Cole raised his shotgun. "Better to end it now," he muttered, sighting Jake's chest. Marcy shoved the barrel aside. "He's not gone, not yet." The book's pages flipped faster, inked names glowing white. Each one was a life, already burning away. Jake gasped, fighting for words. "Fire, burn it." Marcy looked at him, horror in her eyes. "If we burn it, will it end? Or kill us all?" Jake coughed a plume of chalk. His eyes blazed hollow white. Only one way to know. They dragged a book into the church's furnace. The chalk fought them, biting into Jake's flesh, carving names across his arms. The chalk man appeared in the doorway, watching, waiting. Marcy struck the match. The flame trembled, tiny, fragile. Jake seized it in his crumbling hand. "Not the book alone," he rasped. "Me too. It needs both." Marcy's face broke. "Jake, no." He smiled, teeth cracked with powder. "I was never meant to live past that night. I was meant to finish it." And before anyone could stop him, Jake hurled himself and the book into the furnace. Flame roared. The church shook. Dust exploded outward, a storm swallowing Mill Creek. For a heartbeat, the whole world was white, every breath choking, every sound drowned. Then silence. When the haze cleared, the book was gone. The furnace lay shattered. The chalk man vanished. And Jake Holloway was nothing but a pile of pale dust at Marcy's feet. She fell to her knees, sobbing. Sheriff Cole lowered his gun, jaw trembling. The lottery window, across town, cracked and splintered, its chalk lines crumbling to powder. For the first time in centuries, no names appeared. Mill Creek healed, slowly. Shops reopened. Families returned. The church was rebuilt, though the altar remained scorched. Marcy visited it every day, laying wildflowers on the blackened stone. She never forgot the boy who chose fire over chalk. On the next September 31st, the town held its breath. The grocery store window stayed empty. Dawn broke without vanishing a soul. The lottery was over. Or so they believed. Because in the quiet of an abandoned schoolhouse, a child found something buried under the floorboards. A stub of chalk, twitching faintly in the dark. A year passed, then another. Mill Creek lived as if awakening from a bad dream. The window of Denner's grocery stayed empty. September 31st became just another day, laughed at by schoolchildren who asked, why believe in a date that doesn't exist? Houses repainted. Shops reopened. Babies were born who would never know the taste of dread. The town forgot. But forgetting has a price. Marcy Holloway never forgot. Every September, she sat alone at the rebuilt church, staring at the furnace where Jake Holloway had burned. She traced her fingers across the blackened bricks. Sometimes she swore she heard his voice, faint, like a sigh in chalk dust. Not done. But when she turned, the pews were empty. Sheriff Cole told her to let it go. Mrs. Denner said Jake would have wanted her to live, not haunt the past. Marcy nodded politely. But at night, she dreamed of chalk marks appearing on her bedroom walls. In the third year, a stranger came, tall, lean, pale. He arrived at dusk and never gave a name. He asked questions about the lottery, about Jake, about the book. When Marcy saw him, she felt her stomach turn cold. His eyes were wrong, too white. He visited the old schoolhouse, boarded up since before the fire. He stayed there, alone. No one dared ask why. But the children whispered that when they pressed their ears to the door, they heard scratching, like chalk on slate. It began small. A dog vanished from the Hawley farm. Then a girl missed curfew and never returned. Sheriff Cole searched every barn, every ditch, every field. Nothing. On the morning of September 31st, year 4, Marcy woke to a sound she hadn't heard in years, the sharp, high screech of chalk on glass. She ran through the streets barefoot, breath ragged, until she reached Denner's grocery. The window was covered in names, and at the bottom, written last, was hers. The town gathered, horrified. They thought the curse had died with Jake. But the chalk lines glowed faintly in the early dawn. And one by one, the people whose names were listed vanished into thin air, gone without a trace. All except Marcy. She remained, frozen in front of the glass, unable to move. Her reflection was pale and trembling. Behind her reflection, another face looked out. Hollow eyes, a grin too wide. The chalkman was back. Marcy fled to the church, desperate, clutching at the furnace. "Jake," she whispered, voice breaking. "You ended it. You ended it, didn't you?" A faint breeze stirred, carrying white motes of dust. For a moment, she swore she saw him standing in the aisle, hand outstretched, mouth moving soundlessly. But when she blinked, the figure collapsed into powder. And from that powder, a single chalk stub rolled, stopping at her feet. It pulsed, alive, waiting. Marcy knew then. The lottery hadn't ended. Jake hadn't destroyed it. He had only taken it into himself, burning with it, holding it down like a lid on boiling water. And lids never last forever. Now it was hers. The chalk was waiting for her hand to keep the names, to continue the lottery. Her tears streaked white trails across her dusted cheeks. She picked up the chalk. It was warm. And for the first time, she understood what Jake had felt. The power, the terror, the inevitability. The town awoke to the sound of children screaming. They ran to Denner's grocery. The names were back, written neatly, cleanly, in a steady hand. At the very bottom, the chalk line trembled as if freshly written. It spelled out the final name. Marcy Hawley. Final image. The townsfolk pressed their faces against the glass, horrified. But Marcy was already gone. All that remained on the dusty street was a faint trail of footprints leading to the old schoolhouse. And inside, in the dark, a figure stood at the blackboard, writing carefully, patiently, endlessly. The chalk clicked against the slate, over and over. The lottery lived on,